Hi, this is Ofori, the digital reader. Today what I'm going to be talking about is the books that I'm going to be reading in 2024. I gave myself a goal to read 24 books in 2024, and this is the end of January, so what I'm going to kind of be giving an overview of is the books that I call them in my buffer. It's not really a TBR, because basically what I did is I took 24 books and I put them in all my devices so that if I finish a book and I feel like I'm ready to read another book, but I'm not someplace where I can go ahead and shop and peruse and go through my library, I can just hop on to my book account and just pull that book right off. So I have 19 books that are in my buffer. They're ready to go. They're ready for me to read them. It doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to pick one of those books for my next read. I'm really just the way I am going to go through books is I'm not really going to have a list of books I plan to read in the future. And a lot of that is because, at least for me personally, the kind of book I'm interested in very often varies based off of the kind of book I finished and how I like that book. So for example, if I read a book about mythology and it was good, but I'm a little burnt out on mythology, then maybe I'll do some urban fantasy. If I read a book on urban fantasy and it really got me in the mood and it was a great book, then I might choose another book on urban fantasy. So it just kind of varies. The only things I'm really trying to hold myself to, since I'm trying to treat this as a whole new experience, is every even numbered month I'm going to read at least one book that I would have never read before, that is totally out of my wheelhouse. And just so you know, my wheelhouse is hero fiction, urban fantasy, action adventure, pulp type stuff. So if I'm reading a book that is a suspenseful thriller, or I'm reading a book that's a romance, or I'm reading a book that is about philosophy or mysticism or something like that, or even spy novels. I don't really read that many spy novels, just because I usually lean much more towards urban fantasy and science fiction. If I really like that book, I might not go back to pull a book out my buffer. I might just go ahead and buy the next book in that series, or see if there's another book that excites me that's in that genre. So at least for me, that's how I plan to do it. At the end of every month, I'm going to go over the books I read that month and how I felt about them and what I thought about them, and why I continue to read the other books in the series or why I didn't, and just give my overall feelings on those books, and we'll see where the year takes us. So I'm going to because it's 19 books, I'm not going to talk in depth about them, and also I haven't read them yet. I'm just going to give a brief overview of the book, maybe why I put it in my buffer, and then just move on to the next. So starting out is Cursed Cocktails by S.L. Rowland. Cursed Cocktails is basically a cozy fantasy. I really love Legends and Lattes, and I really loved, I think the other one's called Bookshops and Bone Dust. I love both those books. So I wanted another cozy fantasy, as just like an easy palate cleanser. So that's why Cursed Cocktails is in my buffer. And I should note, all the books that I'm talking about here in my buffer, in the description is going to be links to get the ebook on Amazon, and links to get the books as an EPUB, if that's what you're doing, if you're doing EPUBs. There are two books that I actually wanted to read but couldn't find as ebooks. So I bought the physical book, broke it down, scanned it, and turned it into an ebook for myself. And you'll see that in the description. The next book is an anthology of stories about the Shadowrun world. And the Shadowrun world is probably my favorite urban fantasy world. Shadowrun was a role-playing game that kind of hit its heights kind of in the mid-90s, and it is just an incredible, it was such a good idea that even now they're still writing books in that Shadowrun world. Shadowrun is an urban fantasy which is basically a mixture of old school fantasy, elves, dwarves, dragons, mixed with modern day cyberpunk. So you take cyberpunk and urban fantasy and smash it together, you got Shadowrun. So I have a bunch of Shadowrun books. And once again, this is another one that is totally in my wheelhouse that I'm going to be reading when I just want to kind of get my fix in for the stuff I'm into. Alice in Wonderland. This is not a book in my wheelhouse. I put it in because it's not a book in my wheelhouse. It's something completely different than what I would normally read, and I'll see how it goes. Same thing with Oliver Twist. Not in my wheelhouse, but obviously it is a classic, so I'm going to read it, and at least that way I can, add a little bit of variety to my book buffer so that it's just not all fantasy and action and fiction. Next is Norse Mythology, written by Neil Gaiman. Neil Gaiman for me is kind of a hit or miss writer. Some of his stuff I love. Some of his stuff I'm kind of just lukewarm on. I feel like he goes into a tangent that I just can't follow. But some of his stuff I love, and I definitely love his mythology stuff. American Gods and I haven't read the Anansi books, but that will probably be in my queue one day. But this Norse mythology book, as I mentioned, when my whole book reading experience pretty much before I was in college, was all books from my library, my local library, my school library. And so pulp fiction, pulp action writers, and mythology are totally in my wheelhouse. I love them to death. And what I love even more than mythology is different takes on mythology, or mythology from different angles and different views. And I hope to one day come up with a list of my 5 or my 10 favorite alternate take mythology books, because there's some great ones. As always, the train near where I live. I live right across the street from the train, which was really convenient when I was working, and the only price I had to pay is every now and then the horn will go off. So this is definitely in my wheelhouse, and I'd love to see Neil Gaiman's take on it. So Soulless is basically, the way it's been described to me is it is kind of a steampunk-y urban fantasy that is about these genteel ladies who chase vampires. And, it seemed like an interesting take. I love urban fantasy, so I figured, I'll give the first book a try. So they chase vampires and monsters. A lot of people have called it Buffy the Vampire Slayer and steampunk mashed up. So I figured I'd give it a try. I am a person who, I'm not a huge fan of it, but I do like fairy tales. I would say generally fairy tales are kind of an elusive thing for me. I always like to think I'm a fairy tale person, but then whenever I read a fairy tale book, I'm inevitably disappointed a little bit, because it's usually done in an older style. The writing isn't great, and I realize now it's just not that not that advanced a story writing wise as I thought it would be, and generally they're kind of formulaic. But still, I do love I am drawn to hope that I will read a fairy tale that really blows me away. So I'm always giving them a chance. And I saw the movie of the keynote fairy tale in this, the Djinn in the Nightingale's Eye with Idris Elba and Tilda Swinton, and I thought it was really nice. I liked it, so I figured I'd read the other 4 fairy tales and see what I thought. I used to be a big World of Warcraft player. I still follow the game some, but one thing that hasn't left me is I really enjoy their books. A lot of people don't realize that their books are just really good fantasy books. The biggest downside to the World of Warcraft fantasy books is they're not really, they like to think they are, but they're not really standalone books. You kind of have to read most of the books to really, feel excited about what's going on, unless you play the game. If you're playing the game, then you can read one of these standalone books and you'll know the mythos and everything that's going on. But I've read all the World of Warcraft books, and I'm not about to stop now. Hard Luck Hank Screwed the Galaxy. You might say, what in the world? And I'm going to be honest, this is a book I'm taking a flyer on. Basically, it's about this, my understanding is kind of about like this mercenary guy, and he has physical strength and physical toughness, and he gets into hijinks. I picked this book because I kind of have been jonesing for a star-spanning, roguish hero since the Stainless Steel Rat books ended and Harry Harrison passed away. Stainless Steel Rat series was hands down my favorite book series of all time, and I love Jim DeGroot's the hero of those books, and they were written by Harry Harrison. And my prized possession is a signed copy of the Stainless Steel Rat by Harry Harrison. This kind of felt like maybe it can fill that need, so I'm going to go ahead and give it a shot, see what's going on. Judge Dredd. I started reading the Judge Dredd books. The little, they have like a whole bunch of Judge Dredd novels, and I'm a comic book fiction person, so I don't even know if I need to explain. This is in my wheelhouse. This is what I read, 75% of the time before I decided to kind of go into 2024 with kind of a broader view on my reading habits. Same thing with Corpies. Corpies is about a superhero named Titan, who basically was a very popular superhero. Then people found out he was gay, and he kind of got canceled. And then years passed, and people's views about being gay changed, and now he's forming another super team in which he's the head of the super team, and hijinks ensue. So, superhero stuff, superhero fiction. I really enjoy Drew Hayes' superhero books. He has a 4-book series about these superheroes going through a superhero kind of like a college, and you would think that series would be very young adult-ish, but the reason I like that series, the reason why I'm generally not a huge young adult reader, is the angst. If you can take the angst out of young adult books, I would read them all the time, because they're usually great stories. I just kind of get lost in a little bit of there's just so much yearning and so much regret, and this is my fault, and it's just a lot of that angst in a lot of these YA books. But if that's not in a YA book, usually the stories are pretty fascinating. So anyway, those books, I believe they're called, I'll come up with the name, I'll drop the name in the description. I forget the name of those books, but that's an excellent series. So next book, This is out of my wheelhouse. It's called War of the Rats. And I guess I'll just best describe it. For 6 months in 1942, Stalingrad is the center of a titanic struggle between the Russian and German armies, the bloodiest campaign in mankind's long history of warfare. The outcome is pivotal. If Hitler's forces are not stopped, Russia will fall, and with it the world. German soldiers call the battle Rattenkrieg, the War of the Rats. The combat is horrific as soldiers die in the smoking cellars and trenches of a ruined city. Through this twisted carnage stalk two men, one Russian, one German, each the top sniper in his respective army. These two marksmen are equally matched in both skill and tenacity. Each man has his own mission to find his counterpart and kill him. Now this is a perfect example of, this sounds like, if I told people what I like about books, they would say, man, this is right in your wheelhouse. And it is a lot of action, but generally, and I don't know why, I don't really read action, adventure, pulp books that are about contemporary real-world events or historical real-world events. I usually like them to be in a fantasy or science fiction setting, but I'm going to give this a try and see. I also want to read some detective novels. I love watching TV shows based off detective novels, so I'll try a couple of those. I'm also going to try some action books. Generally, I'm not going to read action books that I liked as movies because I just don't generally do that. The only one I ever did that for was Fight Club. The movie was so good I had to read the book. But this sounds exciting, so I'm going to see if I can kind of get into it. Nobody Gets the Girl is basically, it is a superhero novel, and I don't really know, Richard Rogers is an ordinary man until he met the super genius Dr. Nicholas Nabokov. Now trapped in a world that has no memory of him, Richard is an invisible, intangible ghost to everyone but Dr. No and the scientist's two sexy superheroine daughters. Oh dear. Railblade and Thrill. Assigned the codename Nobody, Richard becomes the world's ultimate spy, invisibly battling the superpowered terrorist army run by the mysterious mastermind Rex Monday. I can't lie, this does not sound like a book that I would be interested in reading. This sounds like something that's going to have a little bit too much cheesecake for me. This sounds like anytime in the summary you have to point out somebody's two sexy superheroine daughters, I'm like, okay, this is going to be kind of, we'll see. But anyway, one reason this is in my buffer is because this book has sat unread in my library for about 10 years, and I love superhero fiction, but I just would see this and go, I'll find something else. Confessions of a D-list supervillain. Superhero fiction, definitely in my wheelhouse, so I will be checking this book out, no doubt. This looks like a book, I do enjoy, if written well, superhero books written from the point of view of the villain, so this will be worth a read. The Ship Who Sang. I mean, come on, y'all. It's Anne McCaffrey. When you're talking about prolific writers, Anne McCaffrey is way up there. This is a book about a ship. Once again, haven't read it, but it's about a ship that has been implanted with a human's brain, and I think the relationship that ship has with the person who eventually becomes her pilot. This book, is in my library. I have some older books in my library that, to be honest, I'm not 100% sure how they got there, but there are parts of series, and I figure I might as well read the first one in the series to get it out the way and see if it moves me. I'm definitely lukewarm on the Dragon Riders of Pern. I just felt like they really plumbed it so deeply that I just lost interest after a while. Whereas some of the earlier books I really enjoyed. But we'll see what's going on with this one. Clive Cussler, Pacific Vortex. This is a book about a death-defying hero, so at least they got me there. The only downside is it is a contemporary world book, so it's not science fiction or fantasy. So Dirk Pitt, death-defying adventurer and deep-sea expert, is put to the ultimate test as he plunges into the perilous waters of the Pacific Vortex, a fog-shrouded sea zone where dozens of ships have vanished without a trace. Sorry about that. Let me actually put this on mute because it's my sister, and I guarantee she will call me back in 10 seconds. So, looking at this book, I'll give it a try. It's weird because I love Doc Savage, but to me, especially at the time I read it, Doc Savage was really more science fiction. Purity by Douglas Clegg. This is supposed to be kind of a thriller. It says a dark psychological short novel of dangerous obsession and endless love. That's what I know about it. Definitely not in my wheelhouse, so I figured I'd give it a try and see what it's like. Merlin's Mirror. Andre Norton, great OG writer. So I figured I'll give this a try, and it's got Merlin in it. I believe this is kind of like magic and futuristic at the same time. Don't really know 100% what it's about, but it's Andre Norton, Merlin's Mirror. It's an older book. I figured I'll give it a try to kind of see if I like it. As a matter of fact, let's see. Andre Norton brings new life to the legendary King Arthur and the wizard Merlin in the light of modern knowledge of a lost period of history and today's understanding of science and interplanetary communication. Okay, so it does sound like it's going to be kind of a pseudo science fiction fantasy type book. So I'll give it a read. I'll let y'all know what my opinion is on it. If I get to it, is in my buffer. And last book in my buffer is another Andre Norton, Huon of the Horn. This book caught my attention because it is actually a history book, and it is these are the tales of Huon, Duke of Bordeaux, and of his banishment from Charlemagne's kingdom to fulfill an impossible quest. For Huon, in defending his fallen brother, had killed Charlotte, the king's beloved son, and Charlemagne's wrath could not be appeased. Now Huon, surrounded by his brave and virtuous knights, set off on a perilous journey into the bewitched fairy wood ruled by Oberon, the elfin king. So it's kind of like a Beowulf kind of thing, but and so I'm down for that. I mean, sounds exciting, sounds fantasy-wise. So I'll see if it catches my attention. So that's it. Those are the books that are in my buffer for 2024. Like I said, all of them, links to all of them are in my description, except for two, which were physical books, and those books I had to scan. And just as a quick check, I can tell you right now, those two were near the bottom. Pacific Vortex by Clive Cussler and Huon of the Horn, Andre Norton. Those were books I had to buy and then scan. And more than likely, I probably did that years ago because I've been buying and scanning books for years if I couldn't find them online. So I guess that's it. I will catch up to you later. And this is 040 the Digital Reader. Keep reading.